Now, it's the Tracks of My Years, chosen all this week by Ryan Tedder, songwriter and lead vocalist of One Republic. Not just One Republic, he's written songs for so many other people, including songs like Bleeding Love for Leona Lewis. He's choosing Tracks of My Years this week.
The first cassette that I was ever allowed to have was Pet Sounds. And so for me, the first memory I have of music is the Beach Boys.
It's not a bad place to start, is it?
No, it's not. Sloop John B., for whatever reason, that was my favorite song. And I don't know why, because there's much bigger songs than that. I was like, are these guys singing this high? And I think part of the reason that I sing in the rafters sometimes is because of the Beach Boys.
Right, that's where that comes from.
That's where it comes from.
Were you encouraged to listen to them? Did somebody buy you the cassette?
I grew up in an extremely Christian household, and so I was only allowed to listen to religious music, Christian music and gospel, and the Beach Boys, for whatever reason, my mom determined were harmless. And I think that's because she grew up listening to them, and she loved the Beach Boys, and so she justified that one act. So that was the only act for age 5, 6, 7, 8, really for about 3 or 4 years that I can remember her being okay with me listening to.
What age were you able to start choosing your own listening music?
I got a tiny little handheld radio for like my 7th or 8th birthday, and I would sneak it in. And when I'd lay down, I'd cover the sheets up and I'd pull the antenna out and I would listen to whatever the top 40 station was at the time. And I got a lot of grief for it, but my parents got divorced, and so my dad listened to everything. So I would be exposed to all this other music for 2 days and then go back home to Keith Green and Larry Norman.
Right. We got a big rush of 2 days worth of outside music.
Yeah. Eventually I got old enough where I just started making my own mixtapes off the radio and picking my own music.
Next we've got Walk This Way from Run DMC and Aerosmith.
When you're coming from a super, super Christian background, hip-hop and rock and roll was out of the question for me. Walk This Way combined both. I knew who Run DMC was because I heard about this thing called hip-hop that was taking over the country. I don't think I knew who Aerosmith was at the time. I remember being at a football tournament, and somebody was blasting this on the car during practice, and I ran over to the car and was like, what is this? And I became obsessed. I bought the singles. The first single that I bought was Walk This Way. I bought the cassette. I was probably 8, 9. And that song introduced me to both rock and hip-hop, so it was pretty effective because that kind of defined the rest of my now career. I was trained in classical music on piano for years and years, but the first popular piece of music that I learned to play was I Just Called to Say I Love You. And that got me into Stevie Wonder. And then when I discovered Signed, Sealed, Delivered, I became absolutely obsessed with that song. The thing about Signed, Sealed, Delivered is you can take a room full of strangers, let's say 20 people at a wedding, and you put on Signed, Sealed, Delivered, and by the end of it, everybody's singing. It's like one of those songs. And I think that was also one of the things that turned me on to that style of singing. Because being a lead singer, with One Republic, the hardest thing for me to do through my teenage years and early 20s was find my own sound, because I grew up singing so many styles of music. And Stevie Wonder was where I discovered urban and rhythmic music. From that point on, 90% of what I listened to were black artists, because I just thought they sang better. So...
Yeah. You're right.
They do. They still do.
Tears for Fears and Shout is the next one.
Tears for Fears, Shout, that reminds me of the tail end of elementary school and driving around with my dad, actually. My dad was a huge Tears for Fears fan. We actually covered this song live. It's kind of my last memory from the 80s. And I just loved it. It turned me on to Tears for Fears. It was so different. When I heard that song on the radio, I was just like, who is this? And Tears for Fears was the first song that turned me on to the British music scene. I remember telling my dad, I was like, this guy has a really weird accent, really weird way of singing, of pronouncing words, and my dad's like, oh, he's British. I discovered songs at weird times. I didn't discover the Beatles until I was probably 16, or I just didn't care. I knew they were, but I didn't really care. And then when I discovered Don't Stand So Close to Me, it's one of those weird moments where you go, oh my God, I know that song. I was obsessed with that song. That's The Police. Because when you're a kid, you just know the songs. You don't really half the time know who's singing them. And then sometimes you make the connection later that it was, oh my God, that was Simply Red. I had no idea. And that was one of those songs where I got huge into the Police. And when I found out that Don't Stand So Close to Me was them, I kind of freaked out because I loved that song. That song kind of puts you in the best mood.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it takes you to a nice place.
It takes you to a nice place. And that's the song that turned me on to the Police, but I didn't realize it till 10 years later.
Right. Yeah. Now, Seal, what a great singer.
Oh my God, yeah. My uncle, for my 10th birthday, what was it, 1990, was crazy?
By that, yeah.
Yeah, he came over and gave me 2 cassettes, and he said, this is the biggest act in all of Britain. And I felt so cool because in Oklahoma, which is the middle of nowhere in the middle of the country. Like, you did not have access to any kind of foreign anything. And he gave me this cassette. He's like, it's from Britain, and it's this artist named Seal. You should listen to the song Crazy. It's this massive, massive hit in the UK. And probably about 9 months later, it became a hit in the US. But I just remember feeling how cool I felt having this cassette that none of my friends had. Live and Let Die, Guns N' Roses covered this song, and I bought the single. This is back when Guns N' Roses was massive. This is the tail end of their massiveness. I was playing American football at the time, and I was on a trip from one school to the next on the bus. It came on the radio, the Guns N' Roses version, and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And then my friend was like, that's actually Paul McCartney. It's a cover song. And so I went and bought the original version. Loved it just as much as the Guns N' Roses version, and that turned me on to Paul McCartney, which subsequently then led to me actually discovering the Beatles for the first time.
You took it all in reverse.
Yeah, I took it in as backwards as humanly possible. So Live and Let Die somehow turned me on to the Beatles.
Right, from the Bond film, Live and Let Die.
Yep.
Boys to Men, then, An End of the Road.
This song represents my kind of discovery of songwriters and songwriting. There was a period of time, 90, 91, 92, 93, so about 3 years, where the whole early 90s New Jack swing music scene, you know, Belle Biv DeVoe, Boyz II Men, Gerald Levert, Mint Condition, all these American R&B acts in the early 90s, I loved all of them. I loved every last one of them. It didn't matter how cheesy it was. I was way into Janet Jackson. I was into Michael Jackson. I was into only urban music for a period of time. When Nirvana was exploding, I couldn't really care less. I couldn't believe anybody could sing that good. I was just blown away. And then I discovered Babyface, who was writing the songs, and that pulled the curtain back for me and revealed, oh, people don't write their own songs. I didn't realize that. I thought up until that point that if you were hearing a song that whoever sang it was the person that wrote it, which is funny to think of now. I don't know how they were in the UK, so this might be weird, but in America, there was nothing bigger, nothing, no artist, no band bigger than Boyz II Men in 1991. Until Nirvana came out, nothing was as big as Boyz II Men. For about 2 or 3 years, they absolutely owned the airwaves. Every 5 minutes, they had a song on the radio. So anyway, this song kind of represents the early 90s. I remember staying at my dad's apartment, and all I would do all day was watch VH1 and MTV, back when it was still new. And With or Without You, they played that video. And it's funny because it's not really a great video. The video is kind of boring and kind of dark and just moody, with Bono just looking off and looking pensive. It reminds me of my childhood and of discovering U2. And then Achtung Baby came out, and then that was the first cassette that I bought from U2. And then I bought, you know, Zooropa, and I bought, you know, on and on and on, Pop Mart, all that stuff. I'm still a massive, massive U2 fan. We played in Dublin, and U2's manager was in the crowd, who's a friend of our manager. And first time I'd been nervous. I do not get nervous. I can't explain to you the degree to which I do not get nervous. My nerves got shot a long, long time ago. I walked out on stage, and I was like, why do I feel so weird? And literally, I didn't even know what the feeling was. I was like, wait a minute, am I nervous? I'm nervous. Because, you know, I've got U2's manager sitting out there, and I learned lyrically a lot of what I know about songwriting from reading Bono's lyrics. I got really tired as a songwriter of every song having to be about a girl or a relationship or dating or heartbreak or this, that, and the other. And Bono has a way of writing about these universal themes and making it applicable to everybody, yet specific to him. And he's probably the best at doing that. I picked With or Without You just because when the dust settles and they're long gone, that'll probably be still one of the songs that's being played the most.
And the last one, we're back to the Beatles.
Eleanor Rigby. Two things that song introduced me to. That was the first proper Beatles song that I really gravitated to when I discovered them in my teenage years. I was always a huge fan of orchestration, as I still am. We have a cello player in our band and a viola player. So that kind of caught my interest immediately. That song was so different for them. They've never done a song like it. And the melody just kills me. The harmony on the, look at all the lonely people. That song represents, I would even say, the impetus for like what One Republic is. Could partly be summed up in that moment that I heard Eleanor Rigby. And I thought, if a band can do this, then there's really no rules. To this day, every New Year's Eve, my wife and I host a party, and on the playlist is Eleanor Rigby.
It's always there.
By the Beatles. And it turned me on to every single... That, you know, it always takes one song. It always takes one song to turn you on. Shout turned me on to Tears for Fears, you know, and then I discovered the whole back catalog. And Eleanor Rigby turned me on to the Beatles, which subsequently led me to buying every album. I've bought all the albums probably 5 times because I always lose them. I like to buy them in the hard copy. So Ellen Rigby was the song that opened up the Beatles door for me.
Ryan, thank you so much for choosing these.
Thank you.